Hello, mate. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, not so bad. Not so
Excellent.
bad. Feels like a while since I last spoke.
I know
Last spoke to you.
it's been a wee while. It's
It has
been
been.
I don't know about you, but it's been crazy busy.
Yes. No, I totally agree. It's been flat out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been exactly the same.
Bank holiday
But
this weekend though. You off?
yes, I mean I'm off. I haven't got any plans at the moment. What about yourself?
Documentation then.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, exactly. What about yourself?
No, just heading up north. So heading up to the Highlands, which would be nice.
Oh, good, good. Whereabouts are you at again?
Edinburgh,
Edinburgh. Okay, and where are you heading to?
up to Granton on Spey. So kind
Oh,
of
okay, got it.
Aviemore, Inverness way.
Oh, yeah. I know Aviemore. I've skied up in Aviemore actually.
Nice.
It's
Up in the
it's a
Cairngorms.
nice place. I absolutely love it up there. You get to sort
Yeah.
of when you're driving up, you get to sort of Aviemore, and it just reminds me of like driving through like Canada. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Such a nice drive. I used to travel up to Gairloch,
Oh yeah.
sort of once or twice a year, which was good fun, and that's sort of like up the top west, I think, side of the
Yeah.
coast. But yeah, no, it's I used to love that drive. It's a great drive up there.
Nice. It is. I love that drive up there. As soon as you cross the bridge, it's just open, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So
Yeah,
heading up there tonight, working from up there tomorrow, and then enjoying the nice long bank holiday weekend.
brilliant, brilliant. You do right. You do right. Well, should we get on with what I
Yeah.
think is going to be episode 4
Yes.
of Not Another Tech podcast? And I guess the sort of point of discussion today, we're sort of undernard about this, and we decided to settle on the use of the importance of and usage around emergency access accounts in Entra ID.
Yep.
Um, so I guess why don't you start with giving us a quick breakdown of, what emergency access accounts or break glass accounts are typically sort of used for?
So I mean, as they're called, emergency access. Microsoft give you some good guidelines on them. You should have two, because the idea is if you do any work as your privileged account and you set up, say, a conditional access policy and you apply that to all users, you could potentially find yourself in a sticky situation where you may have locked yourself out. Not just conditional access, you may have forgotten your password, just all sorts of reasons. If you can't get in, you need to have these emergency accounts to log into your 365 tenant. I've, before I even came across that concept of emergency access accounts, I did lock myself out of a tenant, and it was an absolute ball ache. It was a test and dev one. It was one of those ones where I just spun up a 30-day trial and was playing around with things. And let's just say I never logged back into it since. So fortunately, I was in that position where there was nothing in there, so I could just forget about it. No, I did have a domain in there. So it wasn't a domain I used regularly. I spun up the domain for it. But if you're in that situation, you find yourself having to face Microsoft, and whether or not they can get back into it or not, I don't know, actually. I don't think they could let you back in. There must be something in there, but you'd have to jump
normally,
through some hoops.
There's a process that you have to go through, and you've got to be able to prove ownership of the tenant. And I think it's quite a long, drawn out process. I've never had to go through it myself, but I've seen, lots of Reddit posts and people talking about the sort of process. And it sounds like a pretty, long, drawn out process.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
for good
where
reason,
that's where these emergency access accounts come into play. The idea is you exclude them from all conditional access policies. I was going to say group policies because I've been looking at group policies earlier. So blast from the past. But yeah, and up until last year, I think it was, Microsoft would say, give them a nice complex password, a long password, and store it in a safe, store one in one safe and another one in another safe. But actually now the guidance is use a FIDO2 key or pass key or something, just to give you that extra bit of security.
Yeah.
But the key thing is these accounts are not logged on too frequently. It's log them on, create them, and don't use admin as the name or break glass or emergency access as the name. I think that was one of the general guidelines as well.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Joe Blogs or something.
It's interesting you say that. Yeah. So Joe Blogs is maybe more appropriate. It's interesting you say that because there's a lot of arguments for and against having sort of like a randomly generated name, let's say, for emergency access accounts. I've seen organizations where they've done it that way, and they've just been sort of randomly generated letters and numbers and all the rest of it. And the idea being that they don't look like emergency access accounts because they're not labeled emergency access 1, emergency access 2. However, it's funny because I've done a couple of security assessments for clients where they've done exactly that. And what you actually end up finding, if they're randomly generated, they actually end up standing out more. So when they're just sort of randomly generated letters and numbers, it's very, very easy to look at them and go, they're your emergency access accounts. So there is a fine line between it. I think I agree for the most part. It's kind of sort of security by obscurity more than anything, but I think I do agree from a naming convention perspective. If you can have them sort of named as like actual users, Joe Blogs, for example, Jane Doe, whatever it might be, actual users' names, that's kind of a better way to do it. But then you also run the risk of an administrator potentially making changes or adjustments to those accounts, potentially deleting them if they see, this account hasn't logged on in over a year or something like that. So you do have to be a little bit careful, I think, with the naming convention. It has to be well documented.
You put them into a restricted admin unit as well, just to prevent that. But it's that thing of, you have these accounts that, I worked with a customer where they had the 2 break glass accounts, but they just set them up as Hazel and Debbie. And it's a case of, actually, you need to give them a second name, because if it's just the first name, again, that's a red herring to me. You look at it and it stands out like a sore thumb that account is special. And
absolutely.
When you talk about that logon as well, these accounts, you should have some sort of monitoring on them. Again, the Microsoft Learn article I found is really good on this, because it goes through, just set up some log analytics and email alerting. So if that account is logged onto, you get an email to say this account's been used. Yeah. But also, it's testing. You need to test these accounts every quarter, every half year. Create them's great, but actually test your process like anything, like any of your emergency response kind of tests, BC, DR kind of stuff. Test it as frequently as you can, because if you don't, when it happens, you may not be able to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to sort of backtrack a little bit to one of your recommendations there. So you suggested using a restricted management administrative unit, or RMAU for short. For anyone that might be listening, that is essentially an additional container, I guess, that sits within Entra ID. Yeah. And in the case of an RMAU, it almost acts as like a security boundary, if you like. So like in your recommendation there, Andy, you put your emergency access accounts into the RMAU. And then what it allows you to do is essentially delegate access on the RMAU itself. And the way an RMAU works is sort of an enhanced version of administrative unit. It essentially means that your tenant-wide Entra ID administrative roles are not able to interact with any of the resources that sit within that container. So you then have to delegate, an administrative role to the RMAU, and then it would require somebody with that delegated role in order to make changes to those accounts. And like you've just sort of suggested there, let's say, for example, you've got help desk administrators or user administrators within the organization. If those break glass accounts are not in an RMAU, then they could potentially delete them, make changes to them, do anything to them really, based on the role that they've got. So yeah, I think your recommendation for the RMAU is absolutely spot on. It's definitely something that I think any organization should be doing with break glass accounts. And I guess to your point around FIDO2, it is now Microsoft's recommendation to use a FIDO2 security key for emergency access accounts. And I guess that's really been born, I guess, out of the fact that Microsoft introduced mandatory MFA, right? Which was, I think, October last year. Around about October last year. They introduced mandatory MFA, which is essentially any user object that is interacting or authenticating, into some specific Entra portals that we're going to have MFA enforced on them, regardless of whether there's a conditional access policy in place. Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think that applied to sort of like the Azure portal initially. I think it applied to the Intune portal, Windows 365 administrative portal. And Entra. I think eventually Entra, and then it eventually rolled out to, things like Azure PowerShell and sort of infrastructure as code tooling. Yeah. I think actually that whole process has finished now. I think it's been rolled out globally. But of course, because of that, the previous recommendation of excluding them from all of your conditional access policies. Exactly. So, and to be fair, just to clarify for anyone that might be listening, excluding your break glass account from all of your conditional access is still best practice. Because you need to make sure that you've got that. You've taken all of that into account, and you want to make sure that they're not going to be targeted or brought in scope of a policy. So they should still be excluded, but they will have MFA enforced on them. So you should make sure that you've gone through the process of signing into them and setting up MFA in whatever is the most, I guess, to be pragmatic, you've got to say whatever is the most appropriate solution for your organization. But in reality, if you can make that a FIDO2 security key, that's probably what it should be.
That's it. And the beauty of the FIDO2 security key is you're not limited to one.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
You could actually have two keys, each with a different pin, of course, and in two separate locations.
Yeah.
It does go back to that thing of storing the keys in a safe somewhere, but again, testing that process regularly. One thing I would say, again, this is just me on my own keys because it was easy enough, but never register your own account with your admin account on the same key.
Okay. Because, makes sense.
A couple of reasons. One is, well, I've got two FIDO2 keys, and each one's got my GA registered on it and my everyday account. That's just because it's me and it's my own tenant, not for work or anything, my own personal usage. And that's fine. But what I've noticed is if you're using your FIDO2 keys to log into your devices, for example, it uses the last registered account on that key to log in with. Okay. So what I noticed on my own laptop was I enabled FIDO2 login on my Windows device. So I plug my key in, touch it, put my PIN in, I log in. But because I registered my admin account last, it logs me in as my admin account.
That's really good advice. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't run into that scenario personally, but that's really good advice. I guess still, regardless, it's still good practice to have those FIDO2 keys separate. But that's a really great example of why, from a practical perspective, why you would do that. Yeah,
that's it. Then goes on with that whole thing of when you look at privileged access. So you got your everyday account, your admin account. Don't use the same key for that in a business organization. I've got my Windows 365 Link device behind me now that I've been playing with. And when I log on, it's regardless whether it's in the tenant or not, it tries to log me on with the last registered account on that key. So it tries to log me on with a different account, full stop. So FIDO2 keys are great, And absolutely, I would say they're definitely the way to go. But there's that, if you want to register multiple accounts against that one key, don't mix and match your privileged accounts with your everyday accounts, because that you can then get yourself into sticky situations. And certainly don't register your break glass accounts to the same key you use for your everyday account and your privileged account.
That's a good point. And I guess just to add to the point of why you maybe shouldn't share a key, but also enhance security around that sort of authentication process for emergency access accounts, it's usually also recommended. So within Entra, you can define the specific make and model of security keys that you're allowed to use, right? With the a.k.a. GUID. So what I usually recommend is specifying the make and model via the GUID within your authentication strengths policies. So having a dedicated authentication strength for emergency access accounts and specifying the exact make and model of the key that you're using for those accounts, because you might have a separate make and model which you say, do you know what, we're going to only purchase this make and model just for our emergency access accounts, and we might have a different make and model for all of our administrator accounts or our user accounts and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really great way to
definitely. And the other thing about the emergency access accounts, don't PIM them. They're permanently active. They're removed with that, because again, it goes back to that poor discussion why you just not apply any conditional access. If you've got PORs for your GAs or your service admins and your poor infrastructure goes down to using virtual PORs, you're in that sticky situation where you can't get in to do any admin work because you need to have that device, whereas the emergency access accounts bypass that. But don't have them PIM. It's permanently active, not illegible. Yeah, that's great advice. And another one, another suggestion from me is so we talked about excluding excluding your accounts from all of your conditional access policies. But what I would then typically recommend you do is actually have a dedicated. So if you're following something like the persona-based framework for conditional access, you could maybe have some dedicated policies that will apply just to your emergency access accounts, and essentially just look to reduce that attack surface as much as possible. So we kind of already talked about using a FIDO2 security key, maybe enforcing the use of a specific make and model. But then you could even take it one step further, and you could do something like a location restriction. So you could say, if your organization is only based in the UK and you only want your in the case of a scenario, an emergency scenario, you would only have a sign in from the UK, for example. You could go ahead and implement a conditional access policy that states those emergency access certainly block Russia.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And look, I mean, you know yourself that those kind of things you can get around them, but when you're sort of layering that on top of something like FIDO2, the chances of it are slim, very, very slim.
Oh, absolutely. And then it's also the domain name. You use the tenant name for it.
Yes, and that's a great point.
On your vanity domain name for admins. I've seen it all too much where, again, don't use synced accounts for privilege, but for your break glass accounts, set them up on your tenant domain name, keep them separate. So you've got that ability, if anything does happen to your sync, you can still log in. But that's why you should keep your admin account separate as well, because if your privileged account in the cloud gets compromised, your privileged account on-prem then gets compromised if you're syncing them. So never sync them.
And I guess, so just to add to your point about the use of a vanity domain, so presumably that is just for anybody listening, that's for in case you have any issues with that vanity domain, right?
Well, it's if you have any issues with that. I mean, I've seen it with where companies are moving from domain name to domain name or through mergers and acquisitions, and they use things like Mimecast and single sign-on, and their admin accounts are all set with the domain name, so domain1.com. They then change their domain name to domain2.com, and then they go to perform any admin tasks, and they can't because it's all linked to the old one, and they've completely broken single sign-on. So from any privileged access, use the .onmicrosoft.com domain name, But especially for your break glass accounts, use the .onmicrosoft.com domain name, because it then makes it easier when you're needing to trawl through logs or anything. You can just filter it out through that. But also, if you're creating any dynamic groups for your privileged accounts, you just do it on the domain name as well.
Yeah, great suggestion there. Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, they're all absolutely spot on best practices for sort of creating and managing emergency access accounts. I guess one thing I just interested to know your thoughts on, and it was something that came up. I saw it's come up recently in social media and sort of like LinkedIn, and I followed a recent post from Merrill Fernando, who is a PM for Entra at Microsoft, and he did a poll on LinkedIn, and it was whether to use, your standard user accounts for emergency access accounts, or whether or the use of, enterprise apps and service principals, registering an application within Entra, giving that application the relevant roles, so that in the event of an emergency, you can effectively connect to Entra ID, using some sort of certificate-based authentication, via this app registration, and then manage it that way. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it before I give mine.
I don't know, to be honest. I haven't looked into that too much. I did see the post, but obviously it's a completely different way of doing it. I think it's a good idea, but from me, I guess I'm thinking old school. I like that segregation of, you've got that emergency access account just locked away somewhere in case you need it. Whereas if you've got this app available, it means it's there, available all the time. Yeah, that's my thought anyway. Just listening to that description.
And to be fair, I don't have a lot of experience with it. It was something I'd heard about and I'd read about prior to it sort of being brought up recently on social media, but I kind of almost just dismissed it as I'd not seen many people doing it, so I hadn't really put much thought into it. And actually, just looking at Merrill's blog post on it, so the poll that he actually pushed out came back as 20% said yes, you should use service principles, 40% said maybe, 40% said no. So that kind of just goes to show, it's quite a nuanced topic, as he said in his blog, and that there isn't really a clear consensus on whether you should or not. And there's a lot of good arguments sort of against it and for it. And I guess, sort of one of those arguments against it is the lack of MFA. So there is no MFA as such when you are using a service principal, although you would back it up using something like certificate-based authentication. I guess the one that stood out for me, and I'm not going to go through all of it. What I'll do is I'll maybe leave some notes. I'll leave a link to Mel's blog post in the description
that's a good idea.
So people can read it. But the one that stood out to me really was, people struggle enough as it is just trying to secure user-based emergency access accounts. And I would say that securing applications and service principals in Entra is considerably, I don't want to say considerably more difficult, but it's more of a dark art insofar as there is less.
It's more challenging.
It's more challenging. There is a lot less organizations out there doing service principal protection well than there is sort of user protection, and I think it just adds extra complexity when that complexity maybe doesn't necessarily need to be there. And obviously then you've also got the barrier for entry in terms of using it, because in order to connect to it and do things with it, you're going down the PowerShell route, which might be fine for some administrators, but a lot of administrators aren't using those sort of toolings.
I would say the fundamentals would be getting the user accounts, emergency access accounts sorted first.
Yes.
I think that's a given fundamental. But once you've got that sorted, then maybe look at something like this. What's the harm in having both? Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that they both may actually have their place, because you may use the service principal for something else when you need emergency access. Okay, granted, emergency access is, well, we need global admin access to do this task. So therefore, you need to break that glass and push the button kind of thing.
Yeah.
But if you're not mature enough to have got your user kind of account, break glass account sorted, you're certainly not mature enough to look at this, I would think.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely spot on. I think that is absolutely spot on, and a great place to wrap up the episode. What I will do for any of the folks listening or watching is I'll provide a link to Meryl's blog post, because it is really, really interesting to read it and go through, what other administrators and consultants are looking at and suggesting, because there was a lot of chatter on the social media post. So it'd be interesting for anyone that's interested to go through and read that. But I think on that note, we'll wrap up on the basis that people should be using a break glass account, ideally two, following the suggestions that we put together. With using things like a FIDO2 security key, using the use of the .on Microsoft domain, and all the other bits and pieces. So yeah, I mean, if you've not got anything else to add, we'll leave it there.
No, that's all good. Yeah.
Brilliant. In which case, I will catch you in the next one.
Alrighty. Cheers, Nate.
Cheers, Andy. Ta-ra, mate. See you later. Bye.